I mean, look, it means there wasn't any defections. Michel Barnier's call for responsibility doesn't seem to have won over any of the MPs. He was particularly targeting the centre-left party, the Socialist Party, who've been in government in France many times in recent history. The question of whether or not some of those MPs might be willing to abstain, for example, from this vote to try and save the government. He doesn't seem to have convinced them with this message. That's the number in and around what we expected, because it's basically, if you add together the left-wing alliance and Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally, those parties put together give us that total of in and around 330. So it looks like that they didn't manage to convince anyone to cross the line. It's a result that's pretty much then in line with expectations, but now opens up the question of what happens next. What will Emmanuel Macron do? He's just landed back in France in the past few minutes from a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he was trying to brush off a lot of these political questions at home and continue on with international affairs, to little avail, as everyone just wanted to ask him what he planned to do after this vote went through. He had been asked on many occasions whether or not he might resign, and he says that's not an issue. It's not even in question that he would do that. Of course, his term runs till 2027. So we now set ourselves up for the timeline where the French president can take as long as he likes to appoint a new government. We don't think he's going to leave it that long, but it does plunge us into a sort of political vacuum now. We'll have to have a caretaker government to keep current affairs running, but it's going to make those big challenges like dealing with the budget even more difficult.
Stephen, do we have a good idea of who would likely be the next prime minister and what that new government would look like?
We don't. There are a couple of names that have been floated around, but it's not a specific list of people that have been floated. You could imagine that Emmanuel Macron would try and pick from, if not his own political family, those who've already said that they would ally with him. There had been a question before Michel Barnier was picked as to whether he might be able to pick a politician from the Socialist Party, that centre-left party, and thus bring them into this centre alliance that he was trying to create. But they couldn't agree between the left-wing parties on the same candidate that Emmanuel Macron wanted. That was Bernard Cazeneuve, who's a former interior minister. He was the one who had been mentioned last time around. This was in the discussions that led up to Michel Barnier being picked. But the names that are out there now are in the realm of speculation. There's no rallied support around someone. There's no obvious candidate for who would take over, because the challenge facing the person who takes on that is they have the same parliamentary maths to deal with. Michel Barnier was dealt a very difficult hand. He didn't have a majority in Parliament. He did his best to try and build a way of working. He always said that he was leaving it to Parliament to be able to legislate and negotiate on important matters. That's failed. You have to ask who would be brave enough to step into those shoes, because it's a pretty nasty hand of cards to be handed.